Hi everyone, welcome to Mumso Code video guide session. In this video, we're going to write C# code to create a database, to create a table, and then populate a value. So let's first create a model which will in turn be the table in the database. So right click, add folder. I'm going to have it as models. Then my model name is going to be users. So a folder for it, users. And then the actual model. So I'm going to keep it simple. So for me, I just need a user ID. That's going to be the unique identifier in the database. So PROP double tap will give you this format. And I want GUID to be the data type for the ID. Okay. And then the name of the column is going to be ID. The second column that I'm going to have is a name for the user itself. So name. Okay, so now let's go ahead and instruct the entity framework core to say there is a table called users. So I'm going to add an interface for the storage broker, which we have already created with the database connection string and configuration. So this is going to be an interface. So storage broker.user.cs. So for this, since we have the same interface implemented in two files, it's going to be having a partial modifier, which says my capability of the interface is split across multiple files. Okay, now let's go with the class. There's going to be storage broker.user.cs. So what's my broker? I'm connecting to a storage and user is my entity. And that's a C# file, right? Even here, we need to have a partial modifier. So this one also needs it. Okay. So let me go and say the table name, DB. Then my table mod, the table itself is going to have columns. What's that model going to be? It's going to be user. And the table name is users. And then we're going to have the properties for it, which is always going to be get and set whenever the interaction is happening for this particular model. User is not resolving, so let's go and give the namespace that has the reference to it. Okay, good. Now the entity framework will create you a database that you have mentioned in your development JSON setting of type database name is going to be random. And that database is going to have a table called users, which is going to have a column that's defined here, that's ID and name. Okay, so now what we wanted also is about having a data populated inside the table. So it's like create a record inside the table. So for that, what I'm going to say is we're going to override an existing method. So protected override void on model creating is the method. This takes in model builder as the input parameter. And now what I'm going to instruct is to seed the data, seed users. It's going to be performed on this model builder connection. So since this is going to be performed on the user entity, let's go define that in the user partial class. So here we can also, go to one more level of partial class, which says seeding is the action that's getting performed. So storage broker user, and this is my perform. So this is also going to be your partial class. Okay, so we're going to define what the seed user is going to do. So this is going to be a private method, and then it's going to be seed users. The input is model builder. Okay, let's go prepare the data. That is, prepare the value for the row in which the user table has to be inserted with. So this is going to be my service admin user, and this is of type user. And let me define the values for it. So first one is going to be GUID, and if you over this is going to be grid identifier. So what we have to do is prepare the data for it, right? So you can go to View, Other Windows, and C# Interactive. So in this console, you can generate a grid value. So grid dot new grid and enter is going to give you a value. You can take this value and use that as your data for inserting the record. Let's give it in double quotes. There's an error. So it says it cannot implicitly convert string to grid. Since it is in double quotes, the compiler treats it as a string. So we have a method which can help us convert this. So you can hover this parse and see it's taking in a string parameter and then converting it to grid. The next column that we wanted to populate is name. Okay. And the name that I want to give here is admin. So now we have prepared the data that has to be inserted. Now the actual insert has to happen. So let's say model builder dot entity. And what's the entity we are inserting? That's a table, that's user. And then what's the data that it has to insert? So it has data and the variable name where we have stored the data. So far, we have done all the C# code that is required for you to create a database and then create a table called users and then add the data that we have created here. Now let's go perform the migration to see if the changes are getting reflected in our local database. So for that, tools, NuGet Package Manager and Package Manager console. So the command for you to perform the migration is add migration, and then you have to give a name for the migration. So always try to have meaningful information here. So seed users is the operation that I'm trying to perform as part of this migration. And then enter, it's going to build the solution and then apply the migration. While it's performing the migration, it's going to generate you a few files, which will instruct the compiler whenever the migration happens. These are the things that you have to execute. So this is one of the C# file. So let's go add the header file here. Okay. Now let's try to understand. I'm going to minimize this. Control MO is going to, collapse all your methods. So this file has two methods. One is up, the other one is down. So you can over it and read about it. So on a high level, whenever the migration is applied, the up method gets executed. Whenever it's reverted, the down method gets executed. On the up method, this one says it's going to create a table of name users, and it's going to have columns, that is ID and name. This is the data type of the column. And then the table also has a primary key. Then after the table is created, it's going to insert the data to the table users for these columns, and these are the values. Let's see the down part. That's the reverse of what you saw in up. So it's going to be dropping the table. Okay. If you take a look at the git changes, yeah, you have few more files that are generated. Take a look at this designer.cs file. It's again the C# code that instructs whenever a migration happens, these are the activities that it has to perform. And then snapshot file is basically a overview of all the migrations that it has to apply and the order in which it has to apply. So now we have created, few more supporting files by performing the add migration command. Now let's go check at the database in our local SQL instance to see if this actually has a database called random and then has a table called users. Inside the table, does it have that value? For that, you can get into the SQL Server Object Explorer. If that's not visible, you can go to View, SQL Server Object Explorer, and now this is my SQL, right? So let's expand the server. So my local DB, let's expand this. Databases. Okay, looks like I have to refresh it. If still it's not coming, we may have to update it. Yeah, now it's there. So we have this random database here. What are the tables that's inside this database? It's okay, looks like it's not updated. We can execute a command to update it. So again, going back to your package manager console, update database. So it's going to apply all your migrations into your local database. Let's wait and see. Okay, it says the database is already up to date. Let's go refresh and then take a look at it. Tables, I'm actually looking, yeah. So it's actually having the table named users that we defined in the C# file. And then what are the columns here? It should have ID and name, and you can expand the other things based on the configuration that you have done. So the last one that we want to verify is, does it have the actual row of data for which we have inserted? So right click and view data. So this is going to give you a table. Let's expand this. Okay, so it says, hey, you have a table called users, which has a column ID, which has a column name, and there's one row, and this is the value for that row. So this is what we wanted, and it was so easy for us to connect our C# code to the SQL in terms of writing the code to queries translation using Entity Framework Core. Thank you for watching.